Year 9, it's Mrs. Ali. So today we are going to look at the poem My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. You will need a pen and paper to make some notes, the poem itself, and your remote learning booklet. So now that you have done the do now, let's go through the answers. So number 1, the answer is rhyming couplets, when 2 consecutive lines in the poem rhyme, normally the last 2 words. Number 2, Pharaoh Ramses II is whom Ozymandias is based upon. Number 3, there are 15 poems that you need to study in the power and conflict cluster of your anthology. And number 4, enjambment means when a line or stanza in a poem rolls on to the next one. Okay, so it's continuous, there's no punctuation to stop the next line or stanza. So for this first activity, we will be making predictions on the title of the poem. So our first question is, what does my imply about the speaker of the poem? Number 2, what does the noun duchess imply about the types of people we meet in this poem? So think about the duchesses known of our time. Who are they and what social status do they hold? Number 3, the word last is ambiguous. This could mean it is unclear or have more than one meaning to it. What could those be? On this slide, you have information about the poet Robert Browning. You need to read through the information and summarise in no more than 4 bullet points. This should take you 5 minutes. To help you understand the poem a little bit more, you can copy and paste the link for Shmoop and it will come up with a study guide to help you with My Last Duchess, the poem. The characters mentioned in this poem are based on real-life historical figures. The narrator is Duke Alfonso II, who ruled a place in northern Italy. The Duchess whom he speaks about was his first wife, who died in 1561, only aged 17. Only 2 years after he married her, so she was 15 when she first got married. She died under suspicious circumstances and might have been poisoned. The poem is set in 1564, 3 years after the death of the Duchess. An emissary, so a messenger or a representative, has been sent to see the Duke from the Count of Tyrol. The Count is the father of the Duke's next wife. The Duke shows the emissary or the messenger a picture or portrait hanging from his wall of his late wife and remarks on her character, suggesting that she was unfaithful to him and hinting that he might have killed her because of it. During this speech, the Duke makes himself look arrogant, insensitive, and selfish. The poem takes a form of a dramatic monologue. This activity should take us no longer than 10 minutes to complete. So we are analysing a few lines from the poem, and we will be doing this for the next few slides. So for the first thing you need to do is look at lines 1 to 10. The Duke has a painting on his last wife, the Duchess, who is now dead. What does he keep this painting behind? Have a look at the bottom 2 lines of this box that you have in front of you. Okay, the Duke says he is the only one who is allowed to reveal the painting to others. What kind of person do you think that makes him and why? So how could that be a form of control? This next slide, you are asked to answer 2 questions. So number 3, she had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. So what kind of person do you think the Duchess was? How does she act around other men? Does this make her somewhat flirty? How do you think the Duke reacted to that? Okay, so number 4, you need to look at lines 25 to 30. The Duke is listing all the things that make the Duchess equally happy. He starts with, my favourite at her breasts. He's talking about a brooch he has gifted her. What else makes her equally happy? Why do you think that would bother somebody like that? The question you are asked to look at on this slide is, my gift of a 900 years old name. By marrying, the Duke has given the Duchess his name. He says it is a 900 years old name, meaning his well-known family goes back generations. Why do you think he sees this as a gift? And the last question for you to answer is, I gave commands then all smiles stopped together. The Duke does not like the way the Duchess acts around other men, so what do you think he has done to her here? Especially when he says, then all smiles stopped together. What does that imply that he has done? The next task asks you to complete a table. It should take you around 20 minutes. So I have taken an example from the actual table in your remote learning booklet, and this is what you will need to do. So you have a list of words. You need to add the definition. You can get this from Google Dictionary, or if you know it, add it in yourself. You need to read the word in context. So take a quotation from the poem and then tell me what the line means. So an example of this is the word countenance. It means face. Where it is in the poem, strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. And the line means, strangers like you have looked at the painting and studied the emotion in the Duchess's face. In your remote learning booklets, please complete the table. This should take you 20 minutes. So for the next few slides, we are going to be annotating the poem. We will be doing this somewhat together. So what you will need is the poem in front of you, your remote learning booklet, and paper and pen to make notes. This should take us around 40 minutes to complete. For this activity, we will be annotating the poem. It should take us no longer than 40 minutes, but if it does, that's absolutely fine. We will split the poem into sections and go through it together. So the poem begins with the Duke showing a messenger around his art collection. The messenger has come to arrange the terms of the Duke's next marriage to another woman. They come to the painting of the Duke's Last Duchess. The Duke invites the messenger to sit and look at the painting. So, that's my Last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. So for this bit, I want you to answer the question, if the Duchess looks like she was alive, what is the quality of the painting like? That is pretty obvious, it is quite lifelike. Okay, and the next one, I call that piece a wonder now. So look at the verb wonder. You need to highlight it and think about how the Duke feels about the painting. Is he curious about it? Is he amazed by it? What does he feel? Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Frau Pandolf is a fictional artist, but clearly one who is very good. Okay, so why do you think the Duke drops his name into the conversation? What is he trying to prove there? And your extra challenge for this bit is to look at the command that the Duke gives the messenger. Wilt please you sit and look at her? He's inviting his visitors to look at the painting. Okay, so how is the Duchess a victim of the male gaze here? Think about how the Duchess has no control over who looks at her now, as it is a painting, and the Duke, is making people look at her. Here the Duke says that strangers often ask how such a look came to the Duchess's face. He explains that only he is allowed to draw the curtain that hides the painting. So the questions that you need to answer through annotating the poem is, how is the Duke controlling the Duchess even in death? So think about how he is the only one who is allowed to draw back the curtain, and he is the only one who allows people to look at her. Number 2, the Duke says visitors ask him how the Duchess's look came to be in the painting if they durst, which means to dare. How do you think the Duke came across the visitors? Do you think he has invited these people into his home? What do you think he has done? Okay, highlight the words depth and passion. What are the connotations of these words? The Duke goes on to say that it was not only his presence that made the Duchess blush. He also says Fra Pandolf, the artist, complimented the Duchess by saying that paint could never hope to recreate the half blush that is fading on her throat. So the questions you need to answer using annotation are: highlight the word spot of joy. This means the Duchess is blushing. What kind of behaviour does this link to? So think back to previous slides where the Duke seems to be frustrated with her because he thinks she flirts with many people. Okay? A mantle is a cloak or a shawl. If it laps over my lady's wrist too much, what is she doing? So is she potentially taking her shawl off her shoulders and revealing her neck or throat to whoever is painting? Okay? Highlight the word dies. How is this an example of foreshadowing? So think back to previous slides where the Duke insinuates that he has killed the Duchess. And in the last 3 lines, the Duke is saying any compliment made the Duchess blush. Why do you think this would frustrate him? Realise that we've seen some controlling behaviour from him already, so why do you think it would bother him if other people made his wife blush? Also remember, in context, that she was only 17 years old. The Duke begins to criticise the Duchess's behaviour. He says everything made her happy, regardless of what it was. He also hints that she liked everyone she saw and that she was flirtatious with other men. So what do the dashes in the second line suggest about the way the Duke is delivering this line? This is called caesura, when there is a break or a pause in a line or stanza of a poem. So what is he doing here? What impression do we receive of the Duchess based on the way she looks at other people? Remember, in the little description we have, it says that she was quite flirtatious with other men according to the Duke. Okay, and again, look at the last 3 lines. There is no punctuation at the end of each line, which means the Duke is not pausing. This is called enjambment, which we should know. How does the enjambment reflect the increasing anger of the Duke? So what happens when you are angry? Do you pause? Do you break? Or do you need to ramble and get your thoughts and your feelings out very quickly? So is that what is happening to the Duke? The Duke says the Duchess valued any gift regardless of what it was. He believes he has elevated her social status by marrying her because his family is rich and powerful, and is angered that she does not appreciate it in the way she should. So the questions here are asking you, the use of dashes increases. What does this tell us about how the Duke is delivering the lines, and how does he feel about the Duchess as he recounts her flirtatious and, in his view, ungrateful behaviour? So is he getting angrier? Is he choosing his words quite wisely? Or is he trying to justify the way he feels? Here, highlight my gift of a 900-year-old name. How can a name be powerful? Highlight the word stoop. If you stoop, what do? You go quite low, don't you? So why would the Duke not want to be seen to be stooping? So why would he be annoyed that he seems to have gone lower in some form of status or physical form? Okay? And the last one, the Duke says he has no skill in speech. Is he speaking the truth here? Explain your answer. So to me, he seems to be quite skilled in his speech because he knows exactly what he's saying, how he is saying it, who he is saying it to. So do you actually believe that here? The Duke imagines a situation where he confronts the Duchess about her behaviour to say it disgusts him. He ends up saying that confronting her would be beneath him. He goes on to say that the Duchess still smiled at him whenever she walked past, but she also gave everyone else the same smile. So growing tired of this, the Duke gave command and all smiles stopped, presumably because he had killed her. Now she lives on only in the painting. So you need to highlight a line which suggests the Duchess has been unfaithful to the Duke and explain why you have chosen it. You then need to look at the Duke repeating the idea of stooping, so going low. You need to highlight these references and explain why the Duke is against the idea of stooping. Even if you do that in note form, that's absolutely fine. Consider his status and what he would believe about himself in your answer. So why would he be beneath, being quite confrontational with this woman? What would he want from her? Would he want her to do that because she is a woman, or because she's of a lower status and he's elevated her? Okay, so you need to think about that. Also the words never. Okay, and lastly, you need to look at the last 3 lines, beginning with "this screw." How does Browning structure his sentences to make the Duke sound emotionless? So we have semicolons, we have short sentences, we have a couple of 3-word sentences. So what does that suggest about him? The Duke ends his discussion of the Duchess without confirming what really happened to her, although there is a sense of a veiled threat. The Duke's new wife must behave for him or face the consequences. He directs his guests downstairs. As they go, he pauses to point out another work of art, a statue of the god Neptune taming a seahorse, which another famous artist, Claus of Innsbruck, cast in bronze specifically for him, making it very rare. Okay, so you need to highlight the phrase or the question, "Wilt please you rise?" Notice how the Duke controls his guest's every movement. What does this suggest about him? And where else have you actually seen him raise a question which is actually a command in the poem earlier? How has the tone changed in these last few lines now we know of the Duchess's fate? So has he become more commanding, or is he more light-hearted, or is it more threatening? Okay, and the Duke points out a statue of Neptune taming a seahorse. What are the connotations of the word taming? So if you tame something, what do you do? And how can you link it to the relationship between the Duke and the Duchess? So was she too out of control for him, and that's why he killed her? Okay, so how can you link the Neptune taming the seahorse? And the last question, why does the Duke mention another famous artist? What is he trying to show here? Is it his status, his power, his position in society? Okay, think about that. For this activity, you need to look at the word hubris, which means excessive pride or self-confidence. You need to write a definition in your own words. You need to use the term correctly in a sentence. Write a question where the word is the answer, and think of any other words that mean the same thing, so a synonym, and make a list. Then you need to draw an icon or a symbol to illustrate the keyword. This should be around 5 minutes. This activity is optional, but if you are aiming for a grade 6 or above, you should complete it if you have access to the internet. You need to follow the link and it will take you to a video on YouTube. The ideas discussed are complex, but will help you consider the ideas needed for grades 7 to 9. You need to make notes in your remote learning booklet in the grid provided. Okay, you do not have to watch the entire video, but you can to push yourself. If you are unable to watch the YouTube clip on this slide, please copy and paste the YouTube link that has been provided for you and watch the video on YouTube.
Hello and welcome to my video on My Last Duchess. This is a brilliant poem and I hope to be able to bring that out for you. One of the great things about this poem is it works as a piece of drama. It's written as a monologue and it begins here with "That's my last Duchess." And if we emphasise the word "that's," you realise that this conversation has been going on for some time. The Duke is referring back to something he said earlier, and we're suddenly catching up with him in the middle of this conversation. The word last, of course, has many interpretations here, so it's our first indication that the Duchess is dead, but it's also an indication that he's probably had many more wives before this. The fact that this is the last suggests that there's been a succession of them, and that's a further hint that perhaps he's killed more than one. And then she's painted on the wall, which is our evidence for this being a fresco painting. And finally in this line we've got the possessive my, a clue that he's just seen his wife as a possession, and he'll see all his wives, all his duchesses, as possessions, not as fully rounded human beings. Then we get this kind of ironic joke where he notices that she looks as if she were alive, and we can tell from this that he's probably thinking about the very moment when he had her killed. In art, he has preserved her in a way which suits him much more deeply than the pleasure he got from her when she was alive. We can also infer his anger from this word here. I call that piece a wonder now. So clearly in the past he was very unhappy with this painting. Now he realises it's a true masterpiece because it captures her exactly as though she was alive. But at the time it was made, it left him deeply unhappy, and we'll find out why, because he thinks that Frau Pandolf has somehow caused his wife to be unfaithful with him, even though I've introduced the poem showing you how that would be almost impossible while painting a fresco. Despite his jealousy about the artist, however, he's still very keen that the listener knows exactly who the artist is, because he's a famous artist. Therefore, the work of art itself is not quite as important to the Duke as the name of the artist. In other words, art for him is just a commodity. It's something to show his wealth, rather than his appreciation of life, beauty in life. We can see here that he focuses on the artist's hands, and the enjambment here really forces us to think about this before we find out what the hands were doing. And I think that's important because in the Duke's mind he's thinking about these hands being placed upon the flesh of his wife. Then we get to this correction. He's actually worked busily a day. And so in these words, the Duke reveals to us that he must know the artist had no time to have any kind of sexual relationship with his wife. But despite knowing that, his suspicion is still there because his mind is unbalanced by jealousy. And I think Browning is suggesting that that unbalancing isn't just because he's a jealous man, it's one of the consequences of him having so much wealth and so much power. That corruption has affected even the way he thinks, so that he can no longer act rationally. Now we find out that the you of the poem, the person the Duke is speaking to, we're going to find out that this is the representative of a count. The count has a daughter, and he wants this daughter to marry the Duke because of his status and position. And the Duke is very keen to have a new Duchess, providing she pleases him much more than the last. We'll find out what his requirements are. But here, he won't let this count's representative near the painting. Consequently, he makes the man sit, but he allows the man to look at her. This is ironic because it's the looking at her by men that drove him to such jealousy while she was alive. Now he feels very slightly less jealous because he can allow people to look at her, but only if he can still keep them at a distance. Once again, we see him drop the name of Fra Pandolf. This isn't a real artist. Browning has invented him, but he's done so in order to show how vain this Duke is. Even though he was jealous of this artist, he's still overcome with the fact that he's got such an apparently famous artist to paint this picture just for him. The Duke then begins to paint a portrait in words for us, the reading audience, to see what this wife was like. She is a deep person, and her depth is in her passion, so she feels life completely. And that's what art should make people do. It should make people passionate and heighten their positive emotions. But for the Duke, it's done the opposite. It's merely heightened his jealousy, not his passion for life. She's earnest and serious in this picture, but as we'll see later, he chooses to see her as frivolous and irrelevant. In other words, when he describes what we can see, we see a wife that he doesn't recognise. He sees her as something completely different. His view is an entirely sexist one. He only ever sees her as a possession. We, however, through his words, can see her as a deep and passionate human being. And this is partly what makes it a feminist poem, because this depth of her womanhood is denied in the society that the Duke rules. And that's a parallel, perhaps, of the society that Browning is writing in. He's saying that women are not appreciated for themselves. Then Browning uses this clever allusion here. Curtains are drawn, in other words, opened, but of course to draw is also the beginnings of artistic technique. And the Duke here is stalled at this stage. He can only draw, and actually he's only drawing curtains, and this is contrasted with the immense skill that's gone into the painting of the fresco. So this man who thinks he appreciates art so much is actually laughably lacking in skill. And that's a parallel to how he's also lacking in any artistic feeling, any artistic judgment. He only values art by the reputation of its creator, so if it's done by a famous person, and he only values it because it's cost a lot of money, and it's his money, and therefore a symbol of how rich and powerful he is. Here, the Count's representative has obviously asked him something about the wife's expression in this painting, seeming so lifelike. And he says, well, yes, other people have looked at this as though they wanted to ask me if they dared. This is the past tense here, durst. We focus here, like the Duke does, on his power. So he's reminding the Count of how powerful he is. So, not the first, he's going to say, you're not the first person to look here. In other words, this is a bargaining tool. He's telling the Count's representative that he's had other offers from rich fathers who want to marry off their daughters, but obviously he's not accepted their offer. And we'll find out later that's because what he wants is money. He wants a massive dowry in order to marry the daughter of whichever father wants to make an alliance with the Duke. So marriage here has nothing to do with love, it's all to do with his wealth and his power. This is another way that Browning tries to show that the society is corrupt. His jealousy is again revealed when he talks about the expression on his wife's face that wasn't caused by her husband's presence only. In other words, he stood there while his wife's being painted, so jealous has he been about leaving her alone with another man, and despite the fact that he was there, there's still this implication that he was jealous of the attention that the artist gave his wife, even though that was his job. And we can see that here by more enjambment here. So he's calling a blush, if you like, on the wife's face, that spot, and a Victorian reader would have associated the spot as a mark of guilt or shame. And the enjambment asks us to consider her guilt or shame until we find out, no, it was a spot of joy. Quite the opposite. This was a mark of how much she loved life. She actually seems to appreciate life fully, and that, we realise, is one of the reasons the Duke has had her killed. He is, if you like, anti-life, anti-joy. And that again shows the corruption of the ruling classes. They're sucking the joy out of the life of those beneath them. This would be Browning's political point if we read the poem politically. And again, this point is made through the extreme vanity of the Duke, as once more, for the third time, he mentions Fra Pandolf's name. The next description of his wife operates on a huge number of levels. So, to start with, he imagines or remembers the words that the artist must have used that caused his wife to blush. Paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat, the artist might have said, commenting on how she reacted to a previous compliment, this one here. Now, what's going on there is the Duke's jealousy is apparent just in the words that he imagines the painter has said. So the half flush describes his wife as being sexually awakened here. That's probably not what happened at all, but because he's obsessed with his wife having sex with other men, he can't help seeing that in the portrait. Then, in red here, we've got a clue as to how he's had her killed. The language is deliberately violent, and so instead of the word fading here, so imagining the blush fading along her throat, he's used the word dies, a strong clue that in his own mind he's remembering her death and how he had her killed. So along her throat leads us to two possible interpretations. One, he's had her strangled, or two, her throat has been cut. And Browning gives us both these images in a contrast. So this in yellow is the very thing that makes her appear so lifelike in the portrait. And it's her lifelike appearance that is the very thing that reminds the Duke of having her killed. And so there's a clue here that it's not actually just sexual jealousy that's got him to have her killed. It's actually that she is his opposite. She absolutely loves life. This was a spot of joy, remember. And joy seems to be something the Duke is incapable of feeling. And Browning is perhaps suggesting that the Duke is less human than the rest of us because he has been corrupted by power. Browning develops this idea in the next 4 lines. Again, he repeats the idea of the spot of joy, and in yellow I've highlighted all the positive things about his wife here. She's got a heart, in other words, she's kind-natured, she's full of feeling, she's glad, she's impressed by life, she likes whatever she looks on. In other words, like an artist, she is drinking in what the world shows her. An artist then reproduces that on canvas or on the wall, but it's this ability to enjoy the senses and fully appreciate life that marks her out as different from him. And we can see the difference in the red. How shall I say? He's struggling to find words to explain his wife's feelings, because Browning is trying to show us he's incapable of feeling the same way, and he puts limits on everything. So she's too soon made glad, she's too easily impressed. So the Duke is all about negativity. He's about the absence of being positive, the absence of fully embracing life. And that again is an image of how power has corrupted him and made him less and not more of a human being. And then here we can see that he's fixated on jealousy again. Her looks went everywhere. As someone who appreciates the world, she's drinking everything in, but to him it's just looking at other men and fantasizing perhaps about how they might be better, better lovers, better husbands than the Duke she's with. Now, as we listen to him, Browning makes clear that the Duke's fears that his wife is being unfaithful with other men, not just the artist, are also ridiculous. And he's using this jealousy to mask something that's even worse in him, and that's the corruption of his nature, the corruption of power. Let me explain. So here he says, "Sir, 'twas all one." So everything was treated as the same in his wife's eyes, and this really annoys him. He wants to be the most important thing, and he's outraged, not that actually she was talking to other men or flirting with them or enjoying life. What's outraged him is that she should see him as the most important thing in her world, because that's the way he sees himself. But she doesn't. Because she loves life, she finds the good in everything. Here we have the image of the dropping of the daylight in the west. The sunset delighted her, but he's incapable of taking that delight. To himself, he's greater than any sunset. He hates the fact that she's been given a bough of cherries, not because it's come from another man so much, but that because it's a picture of her innocence and enjoyment of life. And he can't understand how she can enjoy life more than she enjoys being married to him. He hates the fact that it's all one. She looks upon him as another good part of life. And how ironic is that? Because, of course, he's not a good part of her life, and yet she still seems to have given him the benefit of the doubt. He was something special in life, just like all these other things. He's also disgusted at the white mule that she used to ride about on. Again, a childish and innocent pleasure, suggesting that there's no malice in her at all. She's just someone who's in love with life. Some readers think that this is proof that she is flirting with other men, but the Duke's own word here to describe the man who's brought the cherries to her as officious, a kind of fussy person following orders, if you like, gives the lie to that. He's obviously not someone behaving in a flirtatious way or, giving her something in secret. He's doing it quite openly because it's a simple, innocent gesture. It's not something that needs to be hidden away. Okay, it's probably time to talk to you a bit about the structure of this monologue. So each line is 10 syllables long. It's crafted. Now Browning's doing this for at least two reasons. One is to show how skilled he is as a poet. A monologue delivered in perfect pentameter lines of 10 syllables. But it's also to show how contrived and mannered the Duke is. This is a speech that he's probably prepared in order to get more money out of the Count's representative, and also in order to warn the Count that he has to have a word with his daughter to make sure his daughter doesn't displease the Duke, because if she does, she's likely to end up dead, like the Last Duchess. But this syllable pattern breaks down on these two lines here. But thanked as if she ranked. This, if you like, is the psychological break in the poem when we find out most what's wrong with the Duke. So let's look at the lines more closely and find out why he hasn't been able to order them, why they've still got 11 syllables instead of 10. He's talking about her blush, and then he picks on her good manners. She's thanked men, and he has to acknowledge that that's good. He'd expect her to behave like that, but he's not happy with it. So there's an objection. But thanked, but now the enjambment, we're expecting a proper reason why he's not happy, but he's lost for words. Somehow, I know not how. And this is the moment that Browning shows us that the Duke doesn't even know why he's behaving in the way he does. He's so out of touch with life that he cannot even understand his own impulses. Now, Browning is prepared to reveal what his impulses are, and they're all about status and power. And through that, Browning is suggesting that status and power have corrupted the Duke, and if we extrapolate that to a wider society, he's saying that that sort of power and rank and privilege will corrupt anyone who is part of that system. So we can look on this as a complete attack against the aristocracy, the whole idea of having a noble class. Now Browning reveals the Duke's hypocrisy. What he values most is his own 900 years old name. So this isn't just himself, it's the power handed down through generation after generation, as presumably each generation has become richer and more powerful. That's the most important thing in his world. He's unable to appreciate the wider world, nature, life itself, that his wife is able to enjoy, and that Browning thinks we all enjoy through art. Next, he asks, who would stoop so low, he means, as to blame his wife? Well, of course he does, but he's claiming that he doesn't. This is where his hypocrisy is revealed. He's claiming that he wouldn't actually blame her, but this whole poem so far has been about finding the negatives in his wife and blaming her. Next, he suggests that he doesn't have skill in speech, but this, of course, is contradicted by the speech itself, where we've seen the pentameter running through every single line, except where he's been lost for words. The next four lines return us again to a feminist interpretation of the poem. Browning here subtly complains about the way a man views a woman. And again, he's suggesting, I think, that that's part of the aristocracy, the way they view women in society. So the first thing we notice is that the Duke never names his wife. She's just here and one, as though she's not even a real person in his mind. The emotion that he uses to describe her first here is, look, disgust. He's actually disgusted in her. We've seen nothing disgusting in her. We've seen only the positive. And so Browning is asking us to see that he chooses the very best in his wife, all those things that we would value in another human being, and is disgusted by those things. This is a symbol of how women are oppressed here, not allowed to be their true selves by the men they marry. And we see another way that women have their power removed. Not only are they not named, not only are they defined by their husband, she's his Duchess, not a person in her own right. Here, he wants her to let herself be lessoned, so, to be taught, he means here. And we can see again that this is another reason he's had her killed. She isn't open to him telling her not just what to do, but how to think. She wants some independence from him, and as a human being. But because she's female and also his possession, he won't let that happen. Many readers just see this as a criticism of the Duke, the character in this poem. However, I think there's an opportunity to see this as social criticism, and Browning is suggesting that in Victorian society, women are still not seen entirely as individuals. And if you look into the history of Victorian society, you'll see how relevant an issue that was. So you've got female authors, for example, disguising their names and publishing themselves with male names simply so they can get published. Browning continues this theme of female equality by having the Duke talk about her matching her wits to yours, in other words, to himself. She sees her own wits as equal to his, despite the fact that he's a man and despite the fact that he's a Duke. His sexism is revealed here. I choose never to stoop, and that image shows how superior he feels to his wife, because to talk to her would be to stoop down low, and he refuses to allow her to see herself as in any way equal to him. And Browning is asking his readers, look, is our society in the 1840s or whatever, is our society really any different? Are women truly individual people who are treated as equals, or are they still seen as vastly inferior? Now the Duke reminds the Count's representative of his power. I gave commands, he says. And this is the moment when we find out he's ordered his wife to be killed. So disgusted with her and so inferior does he think she is, he hasn't even killed her himself as a crime of passion. He's simply done it in a calculated way and had an assassin or assassins do it for him. You can read this, or we can read this, as the idea that there's more than one smile he's had stopped, suggesting that he's had a lover killed with her, or at least a man killed with her. But a more interesting reading, I think, is the idea that it was the smiles themselves which caused him to kill her. In other words, it's her joy in life, not the fact that she's flirting with any man, that has caused him to kill her, because he's the opposite. He has no joy in life. He doesn't experience joy at all. Now, he points out again that she looks alive. This is now more of a threat to the Count's representative, because he's reminding the Count's representative exactly what will happen to his next Duchess if she doesn't behave in a way that he likes. Notice also that as he's getting close to closing the deal on the marriage, that his sentences become much shorter. He's much more businesslike. And this is an extraordinary contrast to the fact that he's just confessed to murder here. And again, Browning is showing the corruption of the society the Duke is at the head of. He believes that the law has no power over him, so he can actually near enough confess that he's had his wife killed and expect to get away with this because he is above the law. And Browning is pointing out that this is a problem with power. When people become too powerful, they automatically become too corrupt. They become untouchable and can operate even as murderers without being punished. Now Browning launches into a fuller attack on the sexism of this society. So what appeals to the Duke is the money, the munificence, generosity with money that he can see in the Count, because it's the money that the Duke's interested in. The money that is attached to a marriage is called a dowry, and there's a whole social system here geared up to making men pay each other for taking one possession, a woman, off their hands. In other words, a daughter is an expense. She's not an asset to a family, she's a liability. And so you pay another man to take her off your hands. An extraordinary idea that shows us how a woman is seen as worth much, much less than a man. Here we can see how women are seen as possessions. So she is the possession of the count, and the daughter possesses a self. This is the self that the Duke is interested in. He's interested in a self that fully respects him. Not a person, but an image. A self here is an image of a person, not the daughter's true personality. Because if she reveals her true personality, like the last Duchess, she'll be killed. Again, he is not interested in her as a human being, but simply as a work of art. She is fair, so she's attractive, and that's all that he demands, apart from complete obedience. Browning draws out this feminist perspective with the Duke's words here. So the daughter's fair self is my object. Literally, he is objectifying a woman, turning her into a thing, something he can control and something he can possess. Exactly the behaviour that feminist criticism accuses men of. And Browning, I think, is being quite explicit about this. He's saying that's what's wrong with male behaviour, not just this Duke, but that's what's wrong with the whole idea of having an aristocracy. Because in order to keep their power, they have to marry into each other's families. And in order to do that, they can't just rely on their sons and daughters marrying for love. They have to marry for power and wealth. Next, we can see how obsessed he is with power when he asks the Count's representative to notice the statue of Neptune, the god of the sea. And this is a metaphor or symbol, if you like, for how he sees himself. And then the seahorse that Neptune is taming is obviously a symbol of his last wife, the Duchess, but also to the Count's representative, a symbol of the Count's daughter. That's what I want, is what he seems to be suggesting. I want somebody that I can tame, somebody that I will see as less than human. Symbolically, she is like a seahorse. And then, as an artist, Browning is seeing the seahorse as representative of nature, and art doesn't seek to dominate nature like that, it seeks to represent nature. Neptune, however, is controlling it, again, in a corrupt way for his own interests. So this is another attack on the Duke's lack of appreciation for art, and by extension, the ruling classes who are buying up art and putting them in private collections. And if you go to any National Trust property, you'll see what I mean. Masterpieces squirreled away just to be viewed by the rich, but not public art to be enjoyed by everyone. Whereas a poem works in the opposite way. Anyone can afford the price of the book, as long as they can read, and anyone can enjoy that level of art. And perhaps Browning is suggesting why poetry here is a higher calling, because it's an art form that can't be so easily corrupted. It's available to everyone. Everyone can appreciate nature through the poet's words. And so the poet genuinely makes the world a better place, because his art or her art is available to everyone. The value of the poet's art is in its craftsmanship then, not its rarity because you can't find it. Here, the statue is rare, and that's what gives it value, not because the skill is rare in making it, but because there aren't many of them around. Once again, the Duke drops the name of the artist Klaus of Innsbruck, again an invented artist, but to show his own vanity again. The art itself has no value to him. The value comes from what it represents about him, how powerful he is, what it represents about his wealth. He can afford something so rare. What it represents about his power. He can afford famous artists' work. And it's cast in bronze. He sees himself as permanent, like a bronze statue. It will last forever. And ultimately, he is completely obsessed with himself, which is why Browning has him end the poem with that last word, me, and an exclamation mark to emphasise his own vanity. Well done if you've stuck through to the end of this video. Here's my summary of the 3 kinds of attack that Browning is making in the poem. We can clearly see that he's attacked the aristocracy for their corruption, for feeling that they're all powerful, being able to live outside the law. Similarly, he's attacking men for their objectification of women, treating women as extensions of themselves, but worse, treating them as objects and possessions. And then finally, its attack on the private collector of art. He believes, it seems through this poem, that art should be available to all. It should be for the benefit of everyone because it celebrates life. And the Duke is the antithesis of that. He does the opposite of celebrating life. He tries to capture a moment of it in art and prefers that to the real thing. In fact, he has the real thing, the Duchess, killed. And then the worst crime in this society seems to me the response to the poem, because the Count is likely to go away, listen to the story of what the Duke has done to his previous Duchess, and still agree to marry his daughter to the Duke. Certainly the Duke expects that, and the fact that this is only the last Duchess, presumably in a line of Duchesses, suggests that his expectation is right. There will be another rich, noble man who will marry his daughter off as an object and possession to this vicious, almost emotionless criminal. If you liked this kind of in-depth analysis, please subscribe to my channel for more videos. Good luck.
So for this last activity, we will be exploring themes. You need to consider the big ideas explored in Robert Browning's My Last Duchess and tick the boxes you think apply to the poem and briefly explain your answers in the box provided to you. 1 or 2 sentences should be fine. So the 4 main themes in My Last Duchess are the power of humans, memory, identity, and the negative emotion of pride. If you have picked another one, that's fine. You just need to make sure that you have given a full explanation as to why you have picked that theme. And that's it, guys. Well done. You should have completed the booklet. Please remember to hand in any work that your teacher asks you to submit. And great job.